Hello there, and you're very welcome to a special edition of Mullooly Matters, our weekly podcast. This time around, we're in Brussels and we have a special focus on housing. In December, the Housing Commissioner, Dan Jorgensen, will come forward with a new special affordable housing plan for Europe. In the intervening period, we'll know more about the Irish government plans. And of course, the European Parliament Committee, of which I'm Vice Chair, will produce their report towards the end of the first quarter next year. Today we're going to deal with real scenarios, however. I'm delighted to welcome not one, but four special guests from Ireland. And I'm going to open this podcast by asking them to introduce themselves. Eoin.
Thank you, Ciaran. My name is Eoin Waldron. I'm an offsite modular manufacturing expert based in the west of Ireland.
Joanna Murphy, real estate agent in Cove, Kinsale and Cork.
David Keniry, consultant on infrastructure projects based in Middleton and Cork.
Thank you, Ciaran. My name is Carol Tallon and I'm advocating for all things placemaking and the faster, better delivery of homes on the ground.
Now, Carol is well known within property circles in Ireland. You'll have seen her work in the Sunday Business Post and on her own channel in iProperty and elsewhere. And I'm very pleased to say she's also co-hosting this special podcast today. So if I disappear halfway through, you'll know where we are. Oh, just to kick it off, I suppose, if you had a magic wand to deal with housing and the crisis in Ireland and in Europe for that matter, what would be the first thing you would approach and tackle?
Housing, as we're all aware, is a very complex problem, but I think it's a divide and conquer approach. That more collaboration, I think, across the different sectors is really what we need across infrastructure, procurement, manufacturing, and also the education and the apprenticeship piece. I really think a system of frameworks with a focus on being biased, off-site construction can really help. It's not the full solution, but it can really help as part of the solution.
And you've proof of that because you've been directly involved in a hands-on situation.
We've been directly involved in a rapid build project for Ukrainian refugees where the normal planning and procurement routes were bypassed because it was an emergency situation. And we entered into a contract with 4 other manufacturers where we all worked together in a collaborative approach to design a uniform design for a single-storey and 2-storey dwelling. We then all went into manufacture in unison, and in parallel, all the construction, the on-site works were running in parallel.
Now, this is the good part, because you told me earlier about these timelines. We all want overnight solutions to housing in Ireland. Tell me about the timelines you produced.
Well, the timelines for a single-storey 2-bed, we were producing 10 a week at our peak. And for the 3-bed 2-storey, they took 6 weeks in the factory and 2 weeks on site to install and complete a terrace of 6 houses. So it's very difficult to do that in the traditional sense. But I think the real innovation in that scheme wasn't just in the technical approach to the project, it was more in the procurement and the collaboration piece. So by having 4 manufacturers all manufacturing the one product, we were able to share the capacity. So many manufacturers fed a single project, which meant we had deliveries coming from all over the country into the same project on a daily basis. So by that way, we were able to speed up the outputs and speed up the time on site. Also, it shared the risk that if any of the manufacturers ran into trouble, the other manufacturers were there to step up and take up that slack and make sure that the project itself wasn't at risk.
It's an incredible success story, and we're going to learn more about it, hopefully. Joanna, you come also as a practitioner. You've been busy yourself in the south of the country, and you have a niche of your own. You're providing housing for a specific sector of society, and an important one too.
Yeah, so senior living, right-sizing, that kind of model. I feel that we're living in a growing ageing population. I would have recently, over the last 3 years, acquired a site for a client of mine. We managed to get that site then rezoned in time for the NDP. That site then has subsequently gone on the market. We've sold the site for a retirement village, but also for independent living. Now, we sold the site subject to planning, which planning will be lodged in the next couple of weeks. For me, that would be a 60-bedroom nursing home, 60 units, probably on a 2-bedroom apartment basis. So therefore, you're looking at 120 potential houses coming back on the market because the people can now live in an environment. And remember that not only are we dealing with the housing, we're also dealing then with loneliness, which is really prevalent amongst senior And I mean, that could be anyone from the age of 65 up, and also independent living for people who have specific needs as well. So
you're speaking to a fan here, Joanna, because I went to see one of these models in the heart of Naas in County Kildare, and I found it to be an absolutely superbly designed project and in the correct location. And you're quite right, it is freeing up homes in the community. It's bringing in older people to an area where they're self-sufficient. They have shoppers beside them, the restaurants beside them, they can walk to everything. And presumably their 2, 3 or 4 bedroom house will go to people who need it.
Absolutely. And then if you look at the current situation, and actually the Macaulay houses, I actually visited that, was a fantastic model. And that's what I suppose drove me on to help get this organised. But if you look at, as you're right, they have to be based in the community. People cannot feel isolated if they're in this environment. And likewise, the current situation now is that the houses are now, let's say they're in a fair deal scheme, they've been caught up for a couple of years, so they can't be sold, which then they're falling into dilapidation, and, you know, there's just a vicious circle. So, yeah, be very passionate about that.
Lots to talk about today. At this point in proceedings, I'm delighted to hand over to somebody with our own general view of housing in Ireland, what we should be doing in terms of infrastructure in the future. Carol, over to you.
Well, thank you, Ciaran. The biggest focus will be on placemaking and how we pull all the multidisciplinary strands together. One thing we've really seen, we have a crisis that has been a decade in place and arguably a decade in the making before that. What's emerging is that no one discipline can actually solve the problem, can tackle the problem alone. We need to get the multidisciplinary voices. So, David, you are the organiser of the European Infrastructure Conference that happens every year. And Ireland plays host to this European Infrastructure Conference because maybe what people don't understand is that actually we do quite a good reputation in terms of delivering infrastructure through PPE. So you might just explain a little bit about maybe the misconceptions around PPP and what needs to happen to be able to enable infrastructure in the ground so we can have these homes that are needed.
Thank you. Yes, so Ireland is a global leader in public-private partnership delivery. We've been doing them since the early noughties, and we have shining examples around the country of buildings, roads, energy projects, higher education that have been delivered, courthouses, they've all been delivered successfully with PPPs. What we've done in the last 10 years is devise the PPP programme included social housing, and the government quite imaginatively and innovatively devised that social housing would be delivered the same way we deliver other PPPs, through availability payments, so that the project is delivered like an infrastructure project, and units can be delivered around any community around the country, rural or urban. And there are 7 of these bundles altogether, and they've been very attractive to international investors and teaming up with Irish contractors and supply chain to bid for them. The other project that is notable is Metrolink. So
sorry, Dave, before we go on to Metrolink, though, just in relation to those bundles, because one of those has been cancelled, can we still say that, given the uncertainty around policy, how do we make the case for the remaining bundles that have yet to be reviewed? How do we make the case that that's a positive way to move forward so we can retain that investment confidence? Well,
I think the importance is pipeline. We need to market needs a pipeline, and it needs certainty in project delivery. And the social housing people programme provided that. And the decision on Bundle 3 has spooked the market, but we need to restore confidence. And we've done 2 bundles, they've been done successfully. And I think we actually need to expand the model to other accommodation cohorts, including student accommodation or senior living.
We hear often across multi-sectors that we need this pipeline. What does a good pipeline in infrastructure delivery look like?
I think, well, as I mentioned, there are 7 bundles of the social housing P programme, and there's Metrolink. So at the moment, and there's a courthouse, the Dublin Family Courthouse is delivered as PPP. So we have 8 or 9 projects currently. So I think what we need is a pipeline of 10 projects. I think that would be a nice number that gives international contractors and Irish contractors 10 chances to win an infrastructure project that's delivered as PPP in Ireland. And that's an attractive market.
And Metrolink, you might just explain there, Metrolink has very recently been given the status of a state agency. What is the distinction there?
Well, I think what people need is, again, as I mentioned, is confidence. There's tremendous interest in Metrolink. The reason I can do the European Infrastructure Conference in Dublin it was Metrolink and the Social Housing PPP programme. I knew those two programmes would attract people to Dublin. So Metrolink is attracting huge interest. Teams have been preparing for years to bid on this project, and they're ready to go. And I think the statutory status, anything that gives confidence that this is going to happen is a good thing at this crucial stage. There's at least 500 people working on Metrolink as we speak, and we should be proud of that. That shows we're serious about it and that it will be delivered.
And we do need to get serious about the infrastructure, because earlier you just told us, Eoin, about the timelines involved in manufacturing in factory and then installing on-site modular homes. Where is the delay then when it comes down to occupying these homes?
Unfortunately, Carol, on some projects the delay can be the provision of the power and water services. So in a sense, there's no point in being quick on the manufacturing and the build of the units if you can't power them, if you can't get water or you can't get wastewater out of them. So it's really a hand-in-glove approach that's required between infrastructure and housing. And it's good that the new infrastructure task force report is coming out. The new report's out from the Department of Housing, etc. So they really need to work together, and we're confident that they will. But it's very much a hand-in-glove approach. And I think if that happens, really we can start addressing the lag in the housing delivery.
When we look at the report that the Housing Commission in Ireland published, they identified very clearly that we have a deficit of 250,000 homes that ought to have been delivered over the past decade that weren't. Now, that's in addition to our housing need that the Housing Department and our Housing Minister has very rightly put some reforms in place, with more on the way, and we're seeing that phased implementation of the Planning and Development Act. But we still need, so in addition to this annual housing need that is anywhere between 40 to 60,000 homes, depending on the data that you're lying to. But we still need to start tackling this deficit, and that needs to be done in an emergency-style response. Do we know what an emergency-style response to delivering homes on the ground looks like?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of talk about us being in an emergency situation, but we're not really seeing the action. And there's a lot of really good things happening that are kind of medium-term policies and medium-term actions being taken. So we can't wait any longer. We need to start taking action on frameworks, on PPPs, in terms of housing and in terms of the infrastructure delivery. For example, if we were to enter into a PPP or a framework around modular housing, where a square meterage rate could be agreed for everything above ground, 4, 5, 6, whatever, 10 manufacturers could be involved in that framework. That then can be notified to all the various different county councils, and they work on a call-off basis with a standardised design, a set square meterage rate above ground. The only variable they have is their ground conditions below that. Mm-hmm. So if all the fire compliance, acoustic compliance, all the thermal bridging, all of those issues are solved for the local authorities, they don't have that concern or those worries about it. It's already predefined. They know what they're getting. The only variable they have, as I said, is below the ground. That way, it makes it a lot easier for procurers, engineers, assessors, or certifiers across the country to commit to projects and get them moving quicker.
Very good. But then, is that going to have the impact we need, say, in rural or for regional home builders? So, Joanna, this is something that you've touched on previously, because you're working with property developers when they're looking at sites. So, regionally, we're having challenges in making housing development viable for private sector developers when they want to go in. What's your experience on the ground in Cork?
So let's say we look at brownfield sites, for example, which brownfield sites, if you look at it, they're very strategically located within the community, the infrastructure is in place, and developers want to be able to develop these sites, but the hurdle that they're coming across, and this is from an environmental perspective, is the materials that were used when they were building these warehouses or old schools, etc. And I use an example like asbestos. It's really hard and really expensive to get rid of that waste in a very environmental friendly way. So this is where maybe like looking at funding, grants, or something that would incentivize the developer or the builder to get involved in those establishments. So, those.
Any of the grants or the Croí Cronagha schemes and other schemes to stimulate home building regionally, or do they take in this kind of environmental site clearance that needs to happen?
No, they don't. No, they don't. So, like, for example, if we just go back to the domestic market, even just for a simple house that could be vacant, that would be entitled to the vacant home grant or the derelict grant, no, there's nothing in place. It's very generic. It's not specific. So when you're looking at asbestos to get rid of that waste, it's really, really expensive. So no, it's not. So that's something needs to be really identified, I suppose, specified, really.
Is that a factor? So yes, it's impacting viability, but is it a factor in whether a infill site potentially in an urban area gets, or even in a regional town, gets developed or not? Is there? Would that?
Well, the cost factor, because if you look at when you're trying to renovate or build out developments, the cost of materials is expensive. You have to go through the whole planning process, which is expensive, and then you now have another layer of expense on it, trying to, I suppose, eliminate that waste from that site. That's another cost. So I suppose, yeah, it's a deterrent. It's not a complete deterrent, but it is a deterrent, and all these things add up. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to encourage the small-time developer back into the market to develop in the area that they're in. By doing that, you're developing the site, you're creating employment in the community, and you're actually making the whole landscape look so much better.
Yeah. And more importantly, you're delivering new homes, which we need. We need them across. And I know you talked about senior living, and that's definitely an issue. But actually, we need all types and tenures of housing, including affordable housing. But touching on the rental, I know you quite a lot of experience in the rental market, and you gave me a stat that was quite alarming to me about the number of notices to quit. So the rental market is becoming more problematic than the sales market right now. What's the situation like in Cork?
OK, so the policy is being introduced in March 26, the new rent policy. As a result of that, it's I could honestly say probably over the last 6 months, Carol, I have served the bones of between 30 and 40 termination notices, because you've had accidental landlords there as a result of the boom time who now they're getting prehistoric rents. It's of no viability for them to hang on to those properties. So now there's an option for them to serve the notice and exit the market. So now we have a problem where in probably 5 or 6 months' time, you have a mass amount of people who are going to be homeless in effect, because we have a small cohort of investors coming into the market, but certainly not enough to match that. So again, that then comes to how do we then get the small-time investor back into the market that will purchase maybe 1 or 2 or 3 properties, but that will always come down to a tax incentive. Of course it will, but we now are going to have this problem for probably the bones of a year as to where are these people going to be housed. So, yeah, that is a problem I see coming.
But what's going to happen to the homes they've vacated for the next year?
Well, those properties that are vacated are either going to be sold to the private sector, or maybe, hopefully, Cork County Council, in our case, might buy those properties. A lot of them will have to be retrofitted and redone to bring them up to an energy standard that would qualify for people to live in them. So again, that's another expense. But that is all going to take time. That is going to take about a year for them to renovate those properties and put them back on the market, which still brings me back to my point. What happens in that space of time to the people that no longer have a place to live?
And in terms of new homes delivery, I feel like all roads point back to planning and procurement. But actually, we know that the Housing Minister has introduced reforms. We know that they're on the table. But we're here in Brussels today, being hosted by Ciaran Mullooly. We're looking at placemaking solutions. And placemaking goes so far beyond the delivery of houses. It's about the communities, how they're going to live, the other facilities that are needed. And I think in terms of the rapid delivery, we have so few examples of what we can point to as fast, rapid, successful delivery. Upon reflection, could we say that the delivery of the Ukrainian homes, would you consider that to be a successful delivery?
100% I would. There was some criticism in the media around the scheme in general, but the real success was the novel approach that was taken on the approach to the planning, the procurement and the collaboration piece. And it's a pity that the momentum didn't continue and that we rolled on with other projects like that, and that it was opened up to the wider market, to other modular manufacturers. There's huge capacity within the market. to fill that void, to fill that gap. There's other modular manufacturers across the country manufacturing units not for housing, for data centres, for pharma, and exporting these all over Europe. There's companies exporting hundreds of millions of euro worth of modular products. But why are they not building houses? Because it's too complex. The planning can often trip it up, can often delay it. So this is an emergency situation. We need to take an emergency approach to the planning on infill sites, close to, like Joanna was saying, close to town centres where people can bring life back into the town centres. If you attack the brownfield sites and the infill sites with modular, you can really start breathing life back into these town centres where cafes will start to open, art galleries will start to open. They will become living towns again. And really, I think that is what we need, to get pride back into our towns and to get people actually living in them and them becoming homes rather than people just staying on the outskirts of the city and commuting back and forth to work.
Absolutely agree, but those homes need water, power, energy. David, are we making enough progress in actually getting the pipes in the ground to be able to put those homes on top? Just earlier this week, the Irish government did announce a push towards private developers being in a position to develop water and wastewater treatment, and they would then be taken in by Uisce Éireann. Is that a solution that you think is workable in the Irish marketplace?
The current scale of the challenge for grid and water is in the region of 200 billion euros. It's
break that figure down for me.
Let's say about 150 for water and 50 for the grid. That's a conservative estimate of what is needed to invest in the infrastructure, the two critical enabling infrastructure that's needed, water and power. We also need transport, not to forget that.
Okay. But in that 200,000, and in the water and wastewater particularly, in order to enable the homes that we need, is it viable and is it practical that the private sector would be able to do that and then later Uisce Éireann take it in charge?
Well, the DBFM model is ideal for bringing in a third party to design, build, finance, maintain the project efficiently, be it through bundles, or it could be, if you want bundles around the country or around a certain region, maybe wastewater plants, but also for the large mega projects like the water supply project in the Greater Dublin Drainage Scheme. By bringing a third party, you're focusing on the infrastructure delivery. It's not about who owns it. Uisce Éireann will continue to own the assets. It's about how you deliver the assets. And by the way, you maintain it over 25 years. That's crucial. So what's needed is a programme of projects that gives visibility to international contractors and investors who can deliver projects at speed and at scale that's required. I don't believe there's a better... It's not just Ireland. Every country in Europe, in the EU, has this challenge. But we can lead because we are leaders in PPP delivery, as I said. So there's no reason why we can't show the lead and show how this is done.
How do we ensure that all-important value for money for the Irish state?
Well, the infrastructure guidelines are quite, they were reviewed and they basically, without changing anything, the infrastructure guidelines, every major project is meant to be screened for PPP delivery anyway. So we're not talking about something new, and that's important in an emergency situation. I'm talking about using the current status quo to deal with the emergency situation. So we know every major project has to be screened for PPP delivery. All I'm saying is that we need visibility faster and clearer and show people what's over the horizon so they can prepare to bid for it.
Does the experience with Metrolink and what we're seeing so far give you confidence that we're on the way to doing that?
I was extremely confident at the start of the year. The decision on social housing bundle 3 has spooked the market. It's a relatively small project, but when you create that level of uncertainty for bidders, it does put you off. No contractor in the world could afford something like that on Metrolink. So that is something to consider. And same with the water supply project. Any project that large, you can't take that kind of risk.
Well, we have an infrastructure task force, so very quickly before we finish up, What, Eoin, are you hoping to see emerge from the infrastructure task force?
I think definitely we need short-term actions as well as medium and long-term actions. To go back on David's point there of the PPPs, fantastic, 100%, that's what we need to do. But in the interim, there's a lot more we can be doing, smaller scale. For example, we mentioned wastewater. There's 4 or 5 companies in Ireland manufacturing modular wastewater and water treatment plants, which can be dropped in, rapid build. So why wait for the big local wastewater treatment plant to be done? Do a small isolated one, the side of a smaller development, and get it moving. Just get things moving.
Why wait? That should be the mantra. Final word to you, Joanna. Based on what you're hearing from would-be home buyers and home sellers, only in very recent weeks the Department of Finance in Ireland has said the housing crisis could last for 15 years. Another 15 years. You're speaking to would-be home buyers, would-be home sellers and landlords and their tenants. What do they need to see out of housing delivery from an Irish and European level?
We need to see the small wins happen now, and one of the wins that I didn't speak about there was the right of place. You know, we have rural Ireland that has been, there's no zoning for houses, and as Eoin said there, even to have, you know, like the modular with the wastewater or the sewage, so that you could again get small developments put into these rural areas which would breathe life into that community, and then you're going to have the person down the road who want to open up the corner shop, and then you're going to have, again, people have a right to live where they're from. They really do. And I think, be it a one-off site or be it a small site with 10 or 15 houses, 20 houses, that's a really good start. And there's so many small wins that we can be doing in the interim while the big housing plan is in progress.
That's exactly what we want to see, and I know that's something that Ciaran has been doing with his work and together with his team and the work on the special committee on housing here in Europe. So I would imagine the right to stay is absolutely going to be coming up on Mullooly Matters next time with Ciaran. But thank you all very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.